All right. Hey, welcome back to part 2 of our cybersecurity risk management framework scenario. Now, if you remember in part 1, we went through steps 1, 2, and 3, how to categorize, how to select controls, how to implement controls. In this section, we're going to cover the last 3, step 4, step 5, and 6. We're going to assess controls, how to authorize, and then continuous monitoring. So just a quick review from part 1. Okay, we had our security control matrix. That say in step 3, this is where we had our menu of controls that we were going to implement. And then this is our implementation narrative. Basically, we walked through how we would implement each of those controls, right? If you remember that from part 1. So now we've implemented controls. What does that mean? We're done, right? We are just good to go. I can just hand the computer to my mom and dad, and they can just take off and start using it, correct? Not so much. Why? Because I want to be sure that the controls that we put in place actually work, okay? And that's why we go into step 4. This is where we assess the controls. So like I said, we've selected them, we've implemented them, and now let's test them. And here's what I mean. No different than when I think I've used this scenario a couple of times. You buy a new house or you buy a used house. What is the first thing that we all do, right? We replace the locks. Now, I don't think most of us, maybe there are some people that are, cocky enough that, you know what, I'm going to install that new lock in the new deadbolt, and I'm just going to close the door and walk away. I am that confident that it works. No. What do? We will install the lock set and the deadbolt, and we'll lock them, and we'll shake the handle 4 or 5 times. Why? We are going to assess that to be sure that that door is actually locked. Well, this is what we do with our controls. Security assessments are the principal vehicle used to verify that implemented security controls are meeting their stated goals and objectives. They do this by providing a few things. They have evidence about the effectiveness of the implemented controls. Also, an indication of the quality of the risk management process employed. So this also tells us that the processes we're using are good. Not only are the technical controls, but our processes are in place, and also some information about the strength and the weaknesses of the information system. So when we look at assessing controls, here again, we start with that information system. This is my parents' computer. Like I said, we've seen this, right? Vulnerability, it has vulnerabilities, and there are threats that are trying to exploit those vulnerabilities. We've implemented a set of controls, a set of 6 controls that's been implemented. So how do we know that these controls will mitigate or deter the risk? How do we know that? Well, this is where we develop an assessment test plan or test procedures. So for each of these controls, I'm going to set up a procedure to validate that control is doing what I thought it should do from the beginning. So before my parents get their computer, I can walk away with a sense of confidence, knowing that I've done the best job of setting up the protections to put the assets on that machine. So let's talk a little bit more about this assessment procedures. Assessment procedures. Really 3 methods that we will typically use to assess controls. We can examine a control, and that is where that's where we're just going to basically review and inspect and observe. So that would be if I just walked up to the door where I just replaced stuff and just looked at the visual inspection. I watched you while you replaced it, and I've done an examination. An interview, that's discussing that with key stakeholders, meaning that I could be a home inspector and I came in and I didn't install that door lock, but I'm going to interview the person who did install it. I want to go through the procedures. Okay, tell me how you went about doing that. An interview, meaning that I'm not going to ask them to rip the whole lock out and redo it. No, but just do an interview. And so where we walk through, let me see your desktop procedures. Let me see the things, your instructions on how you did that. And the third type is a test. And this is where now we have some predetermined assessment objectives, and we want to compare those objects, those test assessment objects, to actual behavior to see what was expected. So we actually build a test plan where kind of a step-by-step. Now, here's the rule of thumb, and this isn't always the case, but we're going to typically use a test on some type of technical control. Some type of technical control that I can actually test. Step 1, do this. Step 2, do this. For instance, the door lock. Step 1, and when I do the assessment, you close door. Step 2, turn the locking mechanism. Step 3, pull handle. So that way there's an actual test. So those are the three basic methods that we would use to assess a control. After we do an assessment, then there's a finding. I mean, what's the outcome? What's the outcome? Did it satisfy or not satisfy the control requirement? So we want to annotate those, right? Was it good? Was it bad? And then artifacts. That's the evidence. That's the evidence of the actual outcome. So when we're assessing controls, control methods, findings, and some type of artifact. All right, so let's walk through how I assessed one of the controls on my parents' computer. All right, iMac 2. That's the control that I did the assessment on. Install antivirus software. Okay, so this was the control that I implemented, and I installed Norton by Symantec. Right. So how do I know Norton is actually capturing any type of malware that may be running on that's going through the machine? I don't know. All right, but there's a way to test that. So here's what I did. I ran a test procedure, a test plan. Okay, that test plan has 3 steps. First, I'm going to download the eCar anti-malware test file. Basically, that's just a little test file. It is non-invasive, but it's a test file that you can run, and it should light up, your antivirus software. Okay, so I downloaded that. Then I verified that the file is detected. So basically, I load the file on my parents' computer, and after I load it and after Norton runs, it should say, "Hey, we found some type of virus." Here again, it's not a real virus. It's just used for this purpose. Then I'm gonna take a screen capture of the results. That's my test plan. So I run that test plan, and the next part of that, I'm gonna document the results. Now for this particular one, I ran it. The file, Symantec, it popped. It recognized the file. It was detected. I got a screen capture. So my test results satisfied, meaning that this control is doing what is operating, is working as expected. And I have an artifact to show my dad, more so than my mom. My mom said, "Oh, that's sweet, baby. That's okay, sugar." That's all I'm gonna get from her. My dad, he's like, "Well, I don't know how I know you. I don't know what you did in there. I saw you sitting there. I don't know what you did, boy." So now I've got an artifact that I can show my dad. Dad, look, I did. I ran this, and this should, yeah, that if there's a virus that comes up, that it's working. See, because that my dad, he's the one who got to, put the bill for this. So he is the scrutinizing one. He wants to make sure he's getting his money's worth. But yeah, so that's how I would assess a control. I implement it, develop and run a test plan, and document the results in a security assessment report. Pretty simple, isn't it? Okay. So now I've ran those on all 6 of the controls. Like I said, I've done the test plan. I've got a security assessment plan. I've got an assessment report. I can give to my dad and say, yeah, there's a level of comfort here that this system is protected. So now I am ready to hand over the keys. I am ready to hand over the mouse. Here's a system. We bought it. We built it up. We ran through all of our security steps. And now we're at step 5, getting ready to just, here you go, give the mouse. Well, when we think about that, here's a system, right, with vulnerabilities. These were the threats. And these threats are constantly trying to attack these vulnerabilities. It's trying to exploit those vulnerabilities. Remember that risk formula. What did we do? We implemented security controls. Okay? Now, here's what I will tell you the truth of the matter. Did I mitigate 100% of the risk? And the answer to that is no. And that's going to be the answer almost in any occasion on any information system. You will typically never mitigate all the risk on an information system. Typically, there will always be some type of residual risk. Even after you implement your controls, there's going to be some type of residual risk that you're going to have to deal with. How do we handle residual risk? That takes us to a process in a document we call a POAM, P-O-A-N-M, a plan of action and milestone. Yeah, this is where now we're going to build a plan of action and milestones to identify whatever type of corrective actions and the resources required to take care of that residual, to track, monitor, and hopefully at some point either mitigate, deter, or have our user accept that residual risk. So what does the POAM look like? I'm going to walk you through that. Now, you can do POAMs many ways. You may have some type of software where you work that, like EMAS or some tool that will do this for you. Or you may be in an environment where you do it manually. So like I said, with my mom and dad, of course, I did this manually. So I set up a little table, using Excel, a little table where I need to be able to track, if I have multiple POAM items, if there are multiple components to this residual risk, I need to have a way of tracking each one so we know what we're talking about. That's why I came up with a POAM number. And now, what is the vulnerability summary? Basically, a brief statement of what that residual risk is. The risk level, the source identifying the vulnerability, and we're going to go through each one of these. And I think it makes more sense if I just open this up, okay? So here we go. My first POAM, 2021, that's the year I first started working on this, 001. So that's the first POAM. That's the first, or the first component of residual risk that I need to start to track and see what resources. So what is that one? Router do not support time of day restrictions. So as you see, the router that my dad wanted to get, because here again, he was a frugal individual, was an old router that he had laying back in the back rooms. I don't think we need a new router, son. Here we go. Here's a router I had when I was back in 1999. I used this router. Great router. Here, just stick that one in. I tried to talk him out of it, but he didn't. He said no. So I installed that old Netgear. That Netgear does not have the capability to do time of day restrictions. Risk level. Now this right here is just a internal assessment that I made at the time that, okay, I say that's going to be a moderate level of risk, meaning that without the time of day restrictions, then those grandkids are going to be probably going out to the internet, all types of, it's not high, but it does pose some threats. How did I identify this? While I was going through step 4, the assessment. As I was going through my assessment of the controls, that's when it showed up, oh my God, this router, I can't even set up time of day restrictions. So in step 4, assessments, is when this was noticed. The security control that it's mapped to, IMAC 3, which was time of day restrictions. Resources required, about $200 to buy and upgrade that router, okay? And when do I think I'm gonna complete it? Probably around 2023. So you see, this is just a layout of each one, of how we track that residual risk. Then what I wanna do from there is actually develop the milestones, okay? This is our plan of action and milestones. So these are the steps that I'm gonna need to take to be able to mitigate this risk. First, I'm gonna research the different types of routers. I expect to be done with that, sometime next year, sometime in 2023. Then I'm gonna allocate funding. Oh, what does that mean? That means I have to get a crowbar to pry my dad's wallet open, to get that credit card out to go buy a new router. Actually, I'll probably buy it myself and give it to him as a Christmas present. Much easier solution. But yes, allocate funding, and with a estimated completion date. Purchase and install the router, and then I'm going to perform an assessment test. So everything that I do, I'm going to follow up with that assessment test, because I want to be sure that the measure that I'm putting in place is actually working. And this is an ongoing POAM item. So this gives you an idea of how we can lay out a plan of action and milestones. And this just happened to be a second one, so that you see, they can just be sequential. 002, unable to implement multi-factor authentication. Risk level, I assessed that it's low. Again, it was found through the assessment. It links back to IMAC 5. That's the control that I'm not meeting. Resources, I don't know. Normally, I don't like to put TBDs there, but at the time, I don't know what it's going to cost to get this done. And here are my milestones. Research, multi-factor authentication solutions. I'm going to prepare a cost risk analysis to take to my dad. Dad, here's the cost, here's the risk. And let him make the decision, do I want to implement this or not? And then if he says, you know what, not going to implement that, all right? And then I'm going to make a recommendation that we tailor that control out, meaning that we are not going to implement that control at all. So that is what a POAM, when you hear that term, P-O-A-M, POAM, that's what a POAM looks like. That's what it does. It's really a resource document, okay? I built this document so I could give it to my dad so he can know how much money he needs to allocate, or to make a decision to, I'm going to accept the risk and we're not going to implement that control. Make sense? All right. So the last step, step 6, continuous monitoring. continuous monitoring, often called ConMon. Now, what in this case, like to my parents' computer, every other Sunday I come over for dinner, and what I'll do, I just want to check. I'll check on them. Hey, how's the computer running? Is everything going okay? I want to continuously monitor their system. So when we talk about ConMon, or continuously monitoring, that's maintaining ongoing situational awareness of the information security, vulnerabilities, threats, and to support any risk management decisions. Because likewise, I want to see if there's any new vulnerabilities that may have come up, new threats. So as when I go over, okay, you got some new neighbors or whatever it could be. So that is part of the ConMon. So when we look at ConMon, what that does is, you have continuous assessing, you're continuously reporting, and that maintains a continuous or authorization. So that way, we know that that system is being looked at on a concurring basis. So like I said, when we talk about continuous assessment, what does that mean? A system is continually assessed according to the assessment frequency, determining the risk profile. Certain things, like for instance, when I go to my parents' house, the antivirus, I'm going to probably pull that up, and look at that to be sure that, Norton AV is working. Okay, still working, still good. Some other things, I'm not going to look at as often. Time of day restrictions, I may only, once a month, once a quarter, I may open up the router just to be sure that nobody's gone into the router and made some changes, or if somebody hit the little red button on the back and done a hard reset or whatever, and now those configuration changes have happened. That's how we do that continuous assessment. Continuous reporting, like I said, that's where I'm going to let my parents know on the same basis, like monthly, quarterly. Hey, look, I looked at your computer. It's still holding up, still working good. And then if there's some changes, for instance, in the POAM, okay, yeah, look, I just got this work. I just bought a new router, put the new router in, it's working. Continuous reporting and continuous authorization. Once they understand, the risk profile. These are the risks associated. Now they know that they are safe to continually operate that system because the security controls are in place and it's being monitored on some type of periodicity. Now, like I say, when we talk about monitored on a periodicity, that's, is it weekly? Are we looking at things daily? There are certain controls we may want to look at weekly, certain controls monthly or quarterly, biannually, annually, or maybe once every 2 years. So that, that's what we're talking about, is setting up that risk profile, which drives how often we're going to look at controls. Now, also within this continuous monitoring process, it's going to kind of walk through how we would, now we're not really assessing controls, but we're actually taking the assessment plan and applying that based on the frequency. So here's my basic set of security controls, right? You recognize these? The same ones we've been using all along. Here's the overlay. Now, I added a column to this called ConMon frequency. So IMAC 1, I'm going to review that monthly, the encrypting data. Yeah, I'm going to look at the data vault, be sure that hard drive is still being encrypted. My IMAC 2, I'm going to look at that weekly, antivirus. IMAC 3, annually. IMAC 4, quarterly. So you see down the line. So that's what as part of our control set now, I can see how often I am going to look at the frequency of each of those controls. So let's take a look at how I would do this, on a monthly basis. Let's take this first control, IMAC 1, encrypt data on the computer. Like I said, it was a high, moderate, and availability didn't matter. It's not part of the overlay. It's part of the baseline set. And every month, I am going to take that control, run the assessment. So I'm going to open up File Vault. I'm going to verify encryption is turned on, take a screen capture of the results, and that gives me an artifact. I can let my dad know, hey, look, Dad, here you go. Yep, your files are being encrypted, so you're good to go. So monthly, that's what I'm going to do, walk through that. So each of those controls now, they are on my continuous monitoring plan and continuous monitoring cycle. One other thing that we do with ConMon, okay, so there's really two pieces to ConMon. We're looking at day-to-day operations and ensuring that the control set is working, and we're continuously monitoring those. The second part is if there's something that have changed in the operating environment, okay, if there's something that have changed the risk profile. Let me show you what I'm talking about, okay. This was the original system that I bought for my parents. Yeah, just a standard, iMac, desktop, 27-inch. Well, my dad really liked that, and he got kind of hooked to it. And now, I guess because of his gaming, now, when he plays Fortnite, he is all over it. Okay, so he's been doing some research on his own, which is scary when you have a man my dad's age who's out there now on the internet doing his own research, because somewhere out there, I don't know where it was, he ran across this. Okay, the Mac to end all Macs, the demigod of Macs. So now he wants this $52,000 computer system. Now this is the same man, who didn't want to buy a $200 router, but now all of a sudden he wants to upgrade his computer system from this modest box to this behemoth. Well, if you think about this now, so now the system environment have changed. So when I look at this system now, there are probably some things I need to do. So there are new capabilities that may drive the reassessment and application of the process. What does that mean? I need to start at step one, and now I need to recategorize, go all the way back to step one and recategorize, because I will guarantee their security requirements now have changed. Availability and protection mechanisms, other things that I need to now start this whole process over, walk through it again based on this change in environment. So when things change in the environment and it changes the risk posture or the risk profile, then yeah, we need to relook and many times go back. Let's recategorize, select new controls, implement those controls, assess the controls, reauthorize. If there's other POAMs, put them back on the POAM, step 5, and then update our continuous monitoring. So it's very important that we do that to ensure that we are maintaining the right, correct authorization or ability to operate in a secure environment. So let's bring all these pieces together, okay? Let's put it all together. The way I look at this is really from three perspectives: the what, the how, and the why. The what is our information system. The how, that's the RMF steps that we've just gone through, and the why is to mitigate risk to our information. So if we look at, when we first started looking at this, I wanted to buy my parents a computer. Didn't have it yet, but I'm just thinking about buying one. At that point, that's when I start the categorization. I want to know what, identify the information that the information system is going to process. Then as I get closer to buying that computer, and now I've got the technical specs, the technical parameters, I can start selecting controls. The how, that's selecting controls. Why? Because I need to select controls needed to protect the information that system is going to process. Now I got the system in hand. Boom, we bought it. Now I can start implementing those controls. That's the how with step 3. Why? Because I want to implement the controls needed to protect the information. You see, it's always about the information that this system is going to process. I want to be sure they work. So on what? On this information system. That's where I assess controls, step 4. And I need to verify the controls that I have selected and implemented are capable of protecting the information and the information system. Now, before I hand the keys over to my mom and dad, on that information system, I want to be sure that I authorize it, that I capture any residual risk. That's where I quantify risk and limitations of the controls needed to protect the information. So you see, it's always about protecting that information. And the last step, as we're in operational mode, is continuously monitor. So in this continual monitoring phase, that is where I'm monitoring the controls needed to protect the information. So you see, we start from step 1, categorization, all the way to step 6. It's all part of continuum from the time, from the development concept all the way out to maturity and to the operation and to sustainment. Our risk management framework process is laying down the things we need to do to be sure risk is mitigated for the information. We're protecting the information system, yes, but really it's about protecting the user's information. In my case, it's my mom and dad's information that they are going to be processing. All right, guys, I know a lot of information, but here again, it's nothing that we do different than we do day to day in our own lives. Again, keeping cyber simple. What do they say? There is nothing new under the sun.